everyone. We will be starting shortly. Just give us about 2 more minutes. Thank you. For your patience, as usual, as you can expect with technical difficulties, but we will go forward. So, today we're talking about the importance of culture when we're understanding and intervening with our clients and patients, those that are involved in any type of care, whether you're a nurse, doctor, nurse practitioner, mental health therapist. And so it's really going to be a very practical workshop today. We do have some challenges with seeing questions on my end, so I will try my best to find a way to get that sorted and talk through those with you guys. So, when we talk about culture, usually culture, we think of art, music, attitude, customs, behavior, beliefs, language, and rituals. And it's important for us as therapists, as practitioners, things that we see around the culture that actually shapes it. Um, it shapes and influences how we too, as practitioners, deliver our therapeutic services. And so it's really important for us to be self-aware. Moment, I want us to just take a second to reflect, perhaps, on a time where we had to sit back and say, hold up, is this me? Or is this actually the client objectively? So I'm just actually going to take about 30 seconds for us to think about that. And then I'm going to share a personal story. Okay, so when I first started in mental health, my first role was as a mental health counselor in the Department of Corrections in the state of South Carolina. And I worked inside of a generalized psychiatric unit within the intake prison. So that means anytime once a person was sentenced to prison in the state of South Carolina, they all went to this one hospital. But within this one hospital as well, we had our psychiatric unit. And so there was an inmate who had committed offenses that one would shy away from, um, maybe even perhaps elicit some type of visceral reaction. And it was my first time actually processing how do I manage my own morals and beliefs while interacting with this 64-year-old client, who's also a white male. And in here I'm coming in as a mental health counselor as a 20-year-old Black female. And so all of those things had to be considered. And so what was my attitude towards, someone who is deemed in society as a criminal? What customs did, my families or friends or what I created by that time, how did that impact how I was viewing my client? What behaviors did I exhibit outside, of my therapeutic space that may impact how I felt? Even my religion, South Carolina, known as part of the Bible Belt, which, Christianity is one of the biggest in the Bible Belt. And so considering all of that, and so that's where supervision definitely played a role in how I managed and maintained through that. But that's just a slight example of how culture shapes and influence how we practice, if we're not mindful how it can shape and influence, and it's important for us to be self-aware when we are providing services. So in general, why does culture matter? And specifically, I would like to bring it home. How Why does culture matter for Bermuda? Unfortunately, I can't see the chat, but I still would like for you guys to provide answers in there so you can at least see them. So you can see what your counterparts or your colleagues are thinking in this space. So why does culture matter in Bermuda when providing therapeutic services and interventions in Bermuda? We know that culture shapes and comes out in how we express and do things. So for Bermuda's landscape, one of the biggest thing about culture is Bermuda I've found to be a very close-knit community. And with that, you can imagine could come some challenges, which we are going to discuss later. But family seems to be a big part of Bermuda's culture. If we really think about it, there's also faith. Churches are everywhere, and the amount of denominations, the vast majority of faith based is large. And so faith also shapes the culture of Bermuda. Music also shapes Bermuda. So understanding the culture of family, the culture of music in Bermuda, understanding the culture of being close is a very key part of what makes Bermuda. I would also like to add in their food. It's a way that we gather and show and express love. It's a really big part. So it was during this episode we were going to have a Mentimeter Cloud so that we can see all of that. So hopefully you've answered that question, and some of your colleagues can see those responses. As I had alluded to, some of those same things can actually be barriers. So it's like a superpower, and can be, and not for all, barriers. So when you think about being a very close knit family, when it's time to or think about considering seeking services, the first thing you want to think about is, ooh, I think my auntie works at EAP, or doesn't Miss Baston work with Miss Opoyanya, and their daughter goes to the same? No, I'm not going to do that. So it's things like that that also can impact in the whole culture. The power then still can be reversed. As a clinician, understand see
Hey
themselves in
everyone,
the frame.
sorry for the technical difficulties. Vikita, sorry, I'm hopping in the middle of here. If you could try turning your video off. It's glitching out quite a bit. Um, let's see if that will fix, so we can still be able to
Okay,
hear you.
turning the video on. Is it still glitching?
It is. It's not glitching, but we lost the PowerPoint. But I see you. I was trying to get your video camera to turn off and just share the PowerPoint.
That's fine. PowerPoint not necessarily needed. We can
Okay.
continue on.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that, but we'll continue on. So now I can see if there's anything in the chat. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Yes, it is important to be aware of any conflicts of interest. Please give me a thumbs up if you can hear me, or say yes. Thank you. And so culture does impact how we develop our relationships, as well as how we interact with our clients. Thank you, guys. So if we don't consider culture, what's the impact of not considering culture in working with clients? And because I can see the chat, you definitely can go for it now. When culture isn't considered, what can be the negative impacts of that? Research wise, one of the biggest impacts I've seen, especially as it pertains to African American males, was during the 60s, 70s, there was a misdiagnosis or misrepresentation of African American males being diagnosed with schizophrenia when it was actually alcoholism and severe depression that may have been um, going on. And so when we don't understand the culture correct, you can misinterpret behaviors when you don't understand culture. Um, Thinking about the language of today's youth, that whole 6, 7, I don't know about you guys, but I am totally over it. I have an 8-year old and a 13-year old. But understanding language is just as important, especially when you're working with youth. Being up to date and kept abreast, if you're not aware, you can totally misinterpret, misgauge what your client is trying to communicate. And it does impact trust. It does, and it can impact whether they know whether you actually know what you're doing. Question your actual clinical experience or your ability to um, do what they actually came to you for. So it is not in our clinical best interest when culture is not considered. And also, silence is a big one when it comes to culture. Um, and a lot of times now, I'm glad to see that we're all now on the same page for the most part when it comes to silence and therapeutic intervention and how important it is. But can you imagine what the difference could be between if it was a man being silent versus a woman being silent? Like it can be interpreted in so many different ways. But one of what you have to think about is that person as an individual, and not only does the culture that the person lives in, but even within families, we have our own culture, right? And so it's not just about the culture of the whole island, but it's also about the culture of the person you're working with, because families have their own structure of culture within the societal culture as a whole. So when we're talking about cultural implications, how does that represent actually in practice and us meeting our clients where they are? And so when we talk about cultural responsiveness in practice, that's talking about how organizations can teach classes, how there's workshops, webinars, how they can be inclusive in welcoming employees, how they support employees once they're on. It's beyond just a practical day-to-day direct practice, but it's actually should be embedded in our actual culture within the workplace, right? And so policies should be or could be in place, and we're finding that more HR systems are providing that resource for their employees. And so I commend those who do and continue to do so, because when you can effectively support your employees culturally, that too is a lesson for them to then implement that in their day to day. And that's even beyond clinical practice. And so there's some key points I want you to get out of culturally responsive being in practice is ask questions about their values and support. Okay, that's where you're gonna start. What are some things that you value? What are some of your beliefs that you believe have shaped who you are and perhaps have brought you to see me today? Um, Partner with other trusted supports and groups out here in Bermuda. We're a small island, but it's a lot of advocacy groups out there. There's a lot of organizations, whether it's 10 people in them or 30, but partner and find out more about organizations locally that support that framework of the understanding of cultural responsiveness. And then you want to use local language and metaphors, however, within correct context. Especially when you with the youth, I would like to highlight because sometimes they're like, that's cringe. But you also still want to remain professional. So make sure it's important or imperative that you are mindful if you're going to use cultural language, even music. Think of, be intentional in how it's utilized within that therapeutic session. And then also respect the family and the faith base, or even if they don't have any. Understanding that Bermuda has a very faith based landscape, it doesn't mean that you may not encounter clients that have no belief systems or do not believe in a higher power. Navigating and managing that, that's where that self-awareness, all of that comes into play in how you provide intervention and therapeutic services. And so I would like for us to get into some practical components of this, and this is where the chat really is going to be moving. And so I look forward to your response. We're going to do about 5 case scenarios, and I would like for you to answer this discussion prompts that are attached. So the first one is about Devin. So Devin is a 28-year-old Bermudian man who has stopped showing up for work and avoids social events. His family believes he is just tired, going through a phase. Devin only comes out to eat and sometimes bathe. What cultural factors might influence how Devin sees his situation? And that question is what cultural factors might influence how Devin sees his situation? All right. Good answers, guys. We do not develop a healthy rapport. Assumptions can be made in the wrong context. You can misinterpret behaviors they may or may not trust. Whether there's food is in the home, religion, and correct, Jermaine. Okay, so Devin is a 28-year-old man who has stopped showing up for work and avoids social events. His family believes he's just tired and it's a phase. Devin only comes out to eat and sometimes bathe. What are the cultural factors that might influence how Devin sees his situation? And so, if some of you have answered, there are a lot of social implications that you may want to review. He's 28 year old man. So, what you would also think about whether are there any stresses in the family belief on what is a man? Correct. Big one, because that question goes. it may vary from person to person. All right, we're going to go to the next one. Anna is a 37-year-old Portuguese woman who has lived in Bermuda for over a decade. She works in the hospitality industry and often juggles long shifts while caring for her elderly mother at home. Recently, Anna has been feeling overwhelmed and emotionally drained, but she downplays her feelings, saying she just needs to be strong. Within her community, mental health is rarely discussed, and she fears people might gossip or think she's crazy. If she seeks help, instead, she turns to her church for a quiet prayer but avoids professional support. How can her workplace, like those in hospitality, play a supportive role in recognizing and addressing mental health needs? So, how can Anna's workplace support clients like Anna based on her current situation? How could they manage this situation with Anna? Yes, so they can advise her of what services are available. What about flexibility for Anna specifically? Um, Especially if it's impacting her work. Are we as managers or directors or those in leadership in general, are we aware of subtle changes with our employees? Like, how do we manage that? Since they seem to see her most, they can be aware of when she may or may not be herself and offer her space and appropriate time off without full loss of pay, as hospitality can be tricky. Correct? Break, time off with pay. Yes. Working remotely. All great answers. And all opportunities that some HRs uh, are actually following and being that flexible with employees, which is important. That's one, retention. That's how you can retain a really good employee, by supporting them in ways like this. And it also includes, just the human rights component um, in this. So seeing Miss Reed on this, it does bring that intersectionality of, just a person's basic human rights and experiencing challenges. The next one is Thomas. Thomas is a 48-year-old British man working in finance. He's been living in Bermuda for several years. Outwardly successful, he privately struggles with loneliness and anxiety. He avoids discussing emotions, joking instead of that stiff upper lip is the British way. When offered mental health support by his workplace, he brushes it off, saying he's fine. How do cultural norms about emotional restraint and self-reliance affect Thomas' help-seeking behavior? How do cultural norms about emotional restraint or not showing emotion and just being self-reliant affect Thomas' help-seeking? The thing about self-reliance is that at some point the body does its own thing, right? Even though the brain may still be going. So being mindful of that. Just reading some of the comments. British culture is very rigid at times. This seems to be how it is, and handling emotion. Miss Martin said the workplace, that was from the previous. I appreciate that, Miss Martin. He has to have the ability to feel safe, to have services that meet him where he is at. And by being self-reliant and help resistant, does that not impact how or how if there's a mental illness that could be developing or evolving, does that impact the prognosis? The longer we withhold treatment, the more gloomy our prognosis could be. So, how thinking about how that would impact him if he is not being open to self help, and how can the organization, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, support him. And Khadijah made a good point. Thank you, Ms. Fox, allowing for open communication without punishment. And if we also have that workplace policy, as Ms. Martin discussed, for mental health to ensure employees know what to expect using the Mental Health Act and the Piper guidelines. And then we have Sophia. Sophia is a 29-year-old Dominican woman who works long hours in a restaurant and supports her parents back home. She's been having trouble sleeping and feels isolated because she doesn't have any local friends. Her English is limited and she prefers speaking Spanish, but there are few services in her language. When offered counseling, she declines, saying, "That's not for us." What role might language and community network play in Sophia's access to care? Thank you, Ms. Harris and Ms. Fox, for your comment about the previous one. Education about mental health in the workplace, correct. Occasionally, there's an understanding that those with upward success can have other challenges. He might feel that no one will be empathetic towards his needs, possibly, especially if that's the environment he's coming from, not understanding that perhaps maybe this environment may be different. For Sophia, what can we do to support Sophia? And how would language and community, what role might language and community network play? So one of the examples I can use personally is that we at Bermuda Hospitals Board, we do have an interpreters list. And so when we have clients that where English is not their main language or primary language, we do access that list to help, correction me, with that. And then, as Miss Reed suggests, connect her with local groups. So, we have in Bermuda, we have a lot of different societies. And so, connecting, being in spaces with those who look like you does make a difference. And it's not about separation or anything else. It's just really about feeling like being a part. And so definitely that connecting her with local groups would be. And Ms. Korea says, even if she seeks help, she may have a hard time expressing herself due to her limited English, which in turn may make it difficult for her counseling to assist her in the way she needs. And that's why it's important to have trusted interpreters that work with organizations that support in those clinical practice where they may have clients who are non-English speaking or primarily non-English speaking. Use a translator app on our phone to communicate with her. Listen, we have these new earbud thingies that can do it in real time. Of course, there should be policies around, how we use our technology within our settings. But there's different technology that's out there now that can definitely help support Ms. Martin said lack of interpreters within the helping services. She may feel insecure about job helping CPS services need to secure those services and publish the information. Good point. Having Portuguese parents, it has been difficult to get my mother the necessary help as far as counseling goes for depression because of the language barrier and then financing for it not being aided by insurances. Yes, and that's where I think Miss Reed's point comes into play by connecting to the local groups who have access to certain uh, networks to help support those who may be underfunded or would require a different level of skill set and a softer approach to intervention. Thank you for sharing, Ms. Harris. And so when we think about culture and us being individually aware, and then we have to then think about how we bridge that to workplace and then into system change as a whole. It's some key reminders I also want to point out, which is incorporating cultural humility into training and policies. um, you can culturally read and know and understand and say that this is how it should be, but there also has to be humility and genuineness within your practice when you're working with clients. Clients, it's been my experience, clients know whether the support that's being offered is genuine. And so it's more than just, okay, now that I'm aware, but then how do I practice that with actually humility, with empathy, with kindness, right? And so, and putting that as part of policy as well. And then consult community voices before implementing these programs. So actually asking your, before you go even go to the community, asking those that are, that works for you, that may be impacted or have the culture, what are your thoughts? And then extend, and it's like, nothing about me without me, nothing about us without us. And so it goes with that as well. So making sure that we have the community voices involved when we're thinking about program implementation and policy implementation, when we're speaking of big things like culture and developing new policies and practices. Gather local data and feedback. It's definitely important to know from the masses, from a survey perspective, what do Bermudians feel like what culture means to us? How do we express that? How do we behave based on our beliefs and practice and behaviors? And I do believe that research is becoming one of the main targets now here in Bermuda because we're a very small island. So research, I don't want to say shouldn't, but it's a bit, has a smaller scale of simplicity to it, but it's still a large task. I do not want to minimize that, but for the size of Bermuda, we should have more research and data that supports some of these recommendations that's coming from human rights, that's coming from mental health into play, especially within the last 5 to 10 years. And celebrate community mental health champions. As you can see, the Department of Health has definitely, along with BHB, have pushed lived experience champions, and we've had some brave champions over the last year of 2025 that's come and shared their stories in different formats and settings via podcasts and panel discussions, highlighting those, supporting those, and encouraging more to come to the forefront, of course, with the right support to tell their stories, because it's these stories that shape how individuals see not just the world, but just Bermuda in general, how they behave and how they see themselves in society. And so finally, when we think of culture as a connection, because earlier we talked about bridging that gap of the policy and the people, and making sure that there is a crossover between the two. Think of one Bermuda culture value that can strengthen mental wellness. What's one culture you believe in Bermuda that actually strengthens our wellness? And I want to share this unknown quote while you guys are typing in the chat. It says, "Every step toward understanding builds a connection." And so Ms. Fox says, "Focus on community." Bermudians' cultural value on community is a strength. Correct. Agreed. Health fairs. Good Friday family fun days are great for mental wellness as it has so many great focus points. The same for Boxing Day following the gum bays. There are activities that are rooted in community and belonging as well as being active. All correct. All correct. And so the main takeaways from today, if you don't remember anything else, culture is not a barrier, but it's actually a bridge of how an understanding of how we can help intervene and assist our clients in their recovery, whatever that looks like for them. Effective care honors identity, who that person is holistically, their language, as well as their lived experience. And cultural responsiveness builds trust and lasting change when we build it into our systems and in our frameworks. And so, if you don't remember anything else, just remember that culture is important because it identifies the person who you're sitting with at that time and providing services to. Each person is an individual and they should be respected as such. Thank you all for your time. And if you have any questions, I would greatly appreciate them and would answer accordingly. Or even any statements as it pertains to what you may have experienced in your workplaces or just in general, or what you think as a practitioner yourself. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you, Ms. Simmons. Ms. Harris says lack of mental health education in the workplace makes a difference. The more education the management gains, they can better assist employees struggling with mental health issues and balancing both work and mental health. Agreed, agreed. And I think it has become such of an important topic that workplaces are making moves and efforts towards understanding psychological safety in the workplace. And so that is big. Miss Martin. Agreed.